You're a startup founder. You think your product is amazing and feel like more people should be buying, but the road is long and slow. It feels like you're stuck. There's always one thing I ask startup founders. Have you talked to your customers? They almost always say, heck yes, we talk to our customers all the time. But what I find is they're either selling or trying to improve their product. These are not customer-focused conversations. If we can get curious about our customers, then we can uncover critical insights that will help us build to the next round. I'm Anna Firmenov, and welcome to Building with Buyers, a show about startup growth where I'll explore how customers help startups build to the next round.
Gia Laudi is co-founder and chief strategist at Forget the Funnel. Georgiana, thank you. Gia, I can call you Gia now. Thank you for joining me on the show. I'm so excited to have you here. You wrote the book, Forget the Funnel, where you talk about customer-led growth and customer-led, the approach for driving predictable recurring revenue. I have your book right here. People can't see it, but it is definitely, you can see it. It's right here. And I also have highlights in here. And I loved reading through this because a lot of what I do in my work with my clients matches perfectly to this customer-led approach that you write about in your book. Customer interviews, like really that's a big part of how I kick off with my clients. So I loved reading this. If you guys haven't, if the listener hasn't read this book and is interested in a customer-led approach for driving predictable recurring revenue, then definitely check this book out. So welcome, Gia. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, I'm so glad that you enjoyed it and found it useful, and I'm really happy to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm exploring the role that customers play in helping startups build to the next round. So it totally made sense to have you on here. It's also very cool. I looked at your background. You have both B2B and B2C experience. That's not always the case. I also have that as part of my background. I wonder if that has something to do with like how that has shaped the approach that you have to marketing and growth with like...
That's a really good question. I don't know that I've ever really asked myself that question, truthfully. My career before marketing, or in the early sort of stages of my marketing career back in like 2000, was it like retail, like consumer, like actual physical retail and like small businesses, and eventually going from consumer-based sort of marketing to more supporting those small businesses. And then I moved into tech and SaaS, specifically in the B2B space, even within SaaS, pretty well exclusively as of like 2010-ish is when I sort of made the switch over. So yeah, there was a pretty significant amount of time spent more on the B2C side, but I've never actually thought about how it might have influenced me or, the decisions that I make. That said, even I can hear the sound of my own voice so long ago, really advocating for the customer experience before I really understood like the principles behind it. It just made sense to me. It's like, it has to click with the customer and you have to put the customer first. Otherwise, you're not in business. Right. So it just makes a lot of sense to me to make, particularly for tech companies who are very enabled to learn more about what customers are actually doing, let alone thinking. We're just in a really great position to be able to create really great customer experiences because we are powered by this technology almost more so than these like brick and mortar businesses of where I sort of started with. So, But even then it was very customer experience focused.
Well, that makes sense. And so I wanted to ask you, Forget the Funnel, your company, who's your ideal buyer?
Yeah, so we work with B2B SaaS teams, typically in a sort of, I don't love this term, but in a post sort of product market fit scenario. So companies and teams who have happily paying customers and have gotten to a certain level of growth, but sort of either stall out or growth becomes inconsistent, or they're not really sure how to get to the next level of growth. And they're sort of in this mindset of like, they understand that what got them here isn't going to get them there. And so they know they have to shift a little bit their thinking. Also, they have typically expanding teams. And so they're moving away from like founder-led sales and, all the sort of strategy living inside of one person's head. And that now needs to be, democratized a little bit more across the team. So that tends to be our sweet spot of clients that we work with.
Do you tend to do more PLG companies that focus on the PLG?
Yeah, so we definitely tend to fall on that side of things. We do work with quite a few more sales-led organizations or teams where they're looking to leverage the product for a more PLG motion that they wouldn't consider themselves product-led, but they know that there's something over there that they could probably be doing a better job of.
Yeah.
Possibly, leveraging programmatic communication or one-to-many and lowering the touch to acquire customers. A lot of sales-led that have very high touch or complicated products that want to leverage a low touch sort of offering to get people into the gate. Product-led sales is part of the more popular language set now. But no, I would say that the B2B SaaS products that really are building more product-led experiences understand inherently that the success of their business depends on their ability to create high converting experiences for their customers. And so those teams know that they need to know a ton about their customers in order to create those experiences. And so eventually they get tired of throwing spaghetti at the wall and they get in touch with us.
Okay, I want to jump right into it. And thank you for agreeing to meet with me because I wanted you to have a heads up on the question I would ask, particularly this one, because I was listening to April Dunford's positioning podcast. Sometimes I do that. I love the work that she does. You joined her for an episode to talk about customer research, positioning, PLG, and some other stuff. And I would remember listening to it and suddenly I was like, wait, what did they just say? Because you guys were talking about. Do you remember? Okay, so think back to that episode with April Dunford. You guys were talking about customer research, and then you started to bash on voice of customer, and you were like, "What's voice of customer? Is that from the 60s or 70s?" And I was like, what are you saying?
Yeah.
So I wanted to I'm honestly curious because, in the work that we do, you, me, and the person listening to the show, most likely, words matter. And so why did you and April bash VOC? Please explain.
I love this question so much. So it's funny because April and I recorded that episode maybe about a month or two after we had recorded an episode of our podcast all about voice of customer.
You did?
Yeah.
I got to listen to that. Is that on your?
Yes, exactly. On our podcast,
which
is called Forget the Funnel podcast.
Okay.
No, it's all good. I would be very curious to hear what you think of that. But what I wanted to sort of clarify is that, how do I say this? I don't want to say we live and die based on voice of customer because that's not actually true because the insight at the end of the day is more important than voice of customer. But I think why April and I don't remember exactly the conversation, to be perfectly honest with you, but I think part of the reason
I remember it. It's in my mind on repeat. No,
I'm
just kidding.
So there's multiple meanings of voice of customer. There's the 90s version of voice of customer when a company's like, hey, we need to listen to the voice of customer or voice of customer. And they talk about it through these really broad, high level, omnipresent, and not so meaningful and tactical or strategic as what I know you mean when you.
And they don't have goals, probably, right? They're just we need to do voice of the customer, and there's no goal attached to it. So it's why are you even doing this, right?
And all it means is the market. It's AKA the market. We need to listen to the market, and they don't actually do anything with it. When we talk about voice of customer, and I'm guessing this is more similar to how you think about voice of customer, we're talking about the specific words that customers use that you can then organize and leverage for all kinds of amazing outputs and outcomes. But specifically for outputs, if we're talking about a copywriter or a messaging strategist, they're leveraging voice of customer for the words, the actual specific words that are being used. But if we're talking more on the insights and strategy side of things, we leverage voice of customer and the patterns that emerge across the multiple conversations that we're having with the customers that we talk to for the teams that we work with. And we do the pattern matching and the affinitizing of voice of customer to identify these themes that then show up, which then help us make They help us articulate, understand, and then provide information to the teams we're working with about their customers in much more meaningful ways, which we use the jobs to be done methodology when we run research. Well, really what we're uncovering is kind of that.
Yeah. And so, side note, I'm going to have Bob Moestra on
good.
the podcast to talk about
Bob
jobs.
Mesta.
What'd you say?
Bob Mesta.
Mesta. Bob
Yes.
Mesta.
Yes.
Good thing we're talking, Gia.
He wrote the foreword of our book. I don't know if you...
He did?
if you caught that.
I think I forgot that he did, but I absolutely am going to have him on the show because of the jobs to be done framework and the fact that honestly, I've been doing voice of customer research forever and I wasn't really knowledgeable about jobs to be done, to be honest with you. Like, I think there's a lot of overlap. And I would love to have him on and I want to talk to him about the jobs to be done framework. I'm sure that there's a lot of overlap there. And I want to see, like, can he take it to the next level or is it like exactly the same thing? So I'm hoping to learn a lot from him, but cool. So yes, your definition and okay, I forgive you for bashing voice of customer.
The corporate version of voice of customer. There's a lot of different ways.
Yes, I understand where you're coming from. I think I also forgive April, but I think that will have to wait and see until I have a conversation with her about this. But do you think there's a better term to use? I've always thought, like, what's a better way to talk about this research? Is it voice of customer research? Is it customer research? I tend to kind of use both. Or is there something else? And I can't think of anything else. So I just go back to voice of customer research and customer research.
I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I don't think it matters.
You don't think it matters, but words matter, right?
Yes, for us as subject matter experts, as the ones doing the work and knowing what it takes to get to meaningful outcomes, we care about the terminology. That's why we picked on voice of customer, because it doesn't actually mean all that much when you think about a certain like profile of individual. And if we're talking about founders of SaaS companies, you can call it anything and it wouldn't matter. What matters is what can they do with it?
Yeah. Okay. I think this is a great way to run into the next question, which is how do you pick the right insights from this research to turn into, and let's say your goal from conducting this customer research is, I want to create positioning, messaging, go-to-market strategy, right? That's usually the goal that I have with my clients. How do you go about picking the right insights to turn that into positioning, messaging, go-to-market strategy? I find it hard to explain how I do this. I just do it. But I'd love to walk through, like, how do you do it so that maybe something I want to do is to explain it in a way that others can do it. Like, if you can figure out how to do this stuff, then by all means, but it's hard to explain. Would you agree with that?
What I tend to rely on is just explaining the process that we run through, like the literal steps that we take to get from you don't know enough about your customers, you want more differentiated positioning and messaging that you can bring to market and use in your marketing and in your materials and in, lots of things, not just in marketing. And what is the process that gets you from where you begin with not knowing enough to feeling clarity, confidence, and like you want to just like spring into action and update everything. And so our process is, we have a very, very specific process that we run through. It's the customer-led growth process that we explain in the book. So like you have a bit of an unfair advantage, Anna, in that you read the book, so you know what the process is. When we do this with companies, I can just describe it a little bit more through the lens of like when we run through this with teams, what we do is we first start with objectives. What are we trying to actually accomplish? Sometimes it's teams that they don't know their customers well enough in order to make good decisions about their positioning and messaging. Sometimes there's something in their customer experience literally broken, like our trial to pay conversion rate fell off a cliff, or we're having trouble with retention or whatever. And sometimes it's positioning and messaging specifically. Sometimes it's like an acute thing they're trying to fix. And then in other situations, it's we want the laundry list of things to do. Like, yes, we need to know more about our customers. Yes, we need better positioning and messaging, but like, we just literally need you to tell us what to do. And so those are the three scenarios. Those are our three jobs to be done of the companies that we work with when they show up to our front door. And so in all of those scenarios, the process is somewhat the same, right? We're walking through identifying first business goals, then who are the customers that you have today that you want to copy paste? Who are the ones that you want to clone? And those are the customers that we make a short list of, get on calls with. We run jobs to be done style interviews with them. And once we've run those jobs to be done style interviews with them, we identify their jobs to be done. That's a whole process, but one that the companies that we care with, they don't care at all about that process. We know how much goes into it, but it doesn't matter for on their side. And then what we do is once we've identified the jobs to be done, we meet with the team and we say, this is what we learned about the different groups of customers that are showing up and getting a ton of value and love your solution. Do you want to target all of them? Do you want to eliminate one? Do you want to focus on one? There's typically a decision to be made there.
Yeah.
And then,
can I stop you for 1 second? Since I work with early stage startups, I typically recommend we focus on one because we don't have enough hands to like clone a really good go-to market.
100%. Yep.
So I typically say like, let's focus on the one. And I
Yes.
focus on having those interviews with that target buyer.
That's right.
And being really specific there. But yeah, it makes sense because you're kind of a little bit further. Maybe the companies that you work with are a little further along and they're a little bit bigger. But my recommendation is always like focus on the one. Yeah.
For sure. I 100% agree. What I would say is the groups that we're helping teams make a decision around prioritization, they are the jobs to be done. So I'm not talking segments based on ICP data or demographic data or persona. I'm really describing the job that this customer is hiring your solution to solve for them. And so that has a ton to do with the solution they might be firing in order to hire yours, the context that they're in when they first experience the need, that trigger moment that tips them over the edge of like, today's the day, what they need to see in your solution, why they chose you over all of the other options. All of that can differ even among the same ICP. In fact, it often does. Most of the companies and teams that we work with come to us with too broad of an understanding of their customer base to sort of mush everybody into one group. And that's not helpful, particularly when we start talking about messaging, right? And really creating those like high converting experiences. So I was just talking through that process of we share that with the team and then we make a decision about prioritization. Now, from there, if we're working with a team that's just looking for positioning and messaging, we'll produce a messaging guide based on all the voice of customer and that prioritized customer. And if we're working with a team that's looking for like, no, we need you to tell us what to do, then we actually go into like customer experience mapping mode. We do a heuristic analysis of the product experience. We do the gap analysis across the current experience versus that ideal.
What I'd love to understand is like, how do you create that messaging from the insights? Like, what is that? Like, let's just dig into that a little bit. Yeah.
I've actually thought about like, maybe I should record some sort of time lapse of like us doing it. Like that would be really interesting. So the process generally, okay, let me just back up by saying we kind of have a paint by numbers way that we start with. It never ends there, but we sort of have the framework within which we sort of lean on to begin with. And typically where we're sort of anchoring messaging is around what we call like value mapping, which is a term that we use that basically means the things that your customer said was really, really important to them mapped to the parts of the product that deliver that value. And from there, we identify what we call value themes. And the value themes put us in a position to be able to craft all kinds of messaging, whether or not it's more focused on like high level, more emotional type of messaging versus very technical. It could be very sort of functional, very product specific, but identifying those themes and the hierarchy of those themes is our sort of base of where the messaging strategy will come from. And then from there, we can go in like a ton of different directions in terms of like, you know, the nested messaging, like I said, like a more emotionally focused, more technically focused. There's all kinds of, you know, assets, obviously, that would come out of that. But that's how we sort of connect the dots between the jobs to be done, leaning on that voice of customer from those jobs to be done, and then identifying those doing the value mapping exercise with the team and identifying the value themes. And then that's the sort of anchor.
So, Gia, I have a question. When you say messaging strategy, based on value themes.
Yep.
Can you help me understand what you mean by that? Like, how do you come up with a messaging strategy? What are the value themes that you're talking about?
So one of the exercises that we run through after we've prioritized a job to be done with a team that we're working with, right? So we've identified generally, 3 to 4, sometimes 5 jobs to be done. We meet with the team, we decide which one of those we're going to prioritize, not to say that in some cases we combine two. We don't like to do that. We like to focus on just one. So I'm going to operate under the assumption, I'm going to explain the process that we go through, assuming that there's one. Okay. So we've got one job to be done that we're focused on. We then take our infamous voice of customer brief, which is where we've organized all of obviously the VOC that came out of those conversations for that particular job to be done. And there's a couple of sort of themes, like we organized our voice of customer briefs through like 9 different dimensions. And a few of those dimensions are key differentiators, top motivators, things that stood out. There's a few of those dimensions that we look to identify these value themes, what we call value themes. So they're the real sort of standout things that help customers make a decision. We tend to go to like the top motivators section first or top differentiators, but basically we're making a decision based on the job to be done, of course, the voice of customer, what was said, the themes that we identified in those conversations, but also matching with the market. So like, what is the competitive space and where does this team have a unique advantage? Then we will bring in that theme accordingly. And so by doing that sort of analysis and looking at the voice of customer in that way, we can identify generally 3, max 4 value themes. I like the number 3. But sometimes when we're working with teams, there's like a 4th one that we have to include, but these other 3, they're so important and it's different enough that we're genuinely coming up with like 3 or 4. Then what we do once we have those 3 or 4. So actually, let me give you an example because you did ask.
Yeah,
that.
I'd love an example.
Yeah. So I want to give an example of like maybe a team that we worked with recently, but like, let me just go high level here because I've got so many in my head that I'm not sure which one to zero in on. So an example of a value theme would be helping me feel organized. And there would be all kinds of voice of customer and mentions of this feeling of maybe being disorganized and how this team helped me feel more organized. That might be one value theme. Another value theme might be helping me calculate ROI. I don't know. I'm just making something up, right? And then a third one might be, I don't know, it's really not that important. The point is that for a team, generally there's these value themes that show up. Also, the other thing to mention is that the hierarchy of those value themes is also really important. So like what we say in what order really, really matters. So we do define that hierarchy as well. Once we've defined that hierarchy, then what we're doing is we're mapping it to the parts of the product.
Quick question, actually.
Yeah,
is like value themes the same as like the value for the buyer, like benefits, differentiate, unique benefits for the buyer? Because that's what it sounds like. Okay.
Yes.
It's like not the features of the product, but the
No.
value to the buyer. Help me
That's
feel
right.
organized. Help me,
That's
look
right.
good in front of my boss. Help
That's right.
me be more efficient with my time because I want to stop working by
Yeah.
3 p.m. on Friday or
That's right.
whatever, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So we're defining the hierarchy of those. And then it's a really simple exercise. Well, it's really simple. There is a discussion to be had, and we generally like to do this with the teams that we work with, where we do what we call value mapping, it is exactly like it sounds, where we're basically taking those value themes and mapping it to product attributes that basically deliver on that value. Sometimes it's features, sometimes it's feature sets, sometimes it's just attributes of the product on the whole. It's not necessarily that we're coming up with like a feature list, although sometimes it is a list of features, but we're basically organizing them by value theme. Now, you can imagine that you can go many directions once you've done this value mapping exercise, right? There's the direction of messaging, which is what we're talking about in this case. But also with some teams, what we do after value mapping is talk about how to organize their feature families or maybe like reorganize their feature families and how they present them on a pricing page or, as an internal tool for the team for thinking about how the product gets developed and built on over time. Or in a lot of cases, how we would think about introducing the product to customers, right? But in the case of messaging, we're taking those value themes and then we're taking the voice of customer and then we're crafting literal like words leaning onto the VOC, leaning into the value themes, and crafting a messaging strategy based on that. And that's kind of like the backbone of the messaging strategy. There's other things, right? There's like the top level sort of value propositions, and there's other aspects of a messaging guide or a messaging strategy, but we do start with the value themes because they're the backbone.
I actually love that. And I don't do that today. What I do is make sure that we know our top unique benefits, the value for the buyer, like so important to cover and voice the customer research, and so important to know what that is, because that's the thing that people care about, not your product features, right?
That's right.
But I love how you do the value mapping process, like value mapping to the product features. So for example, like help me feel organized. So then what features of the product actually get me there?
That's right.
And so I do really like that. And I think I'm going to start doing that more because we don't really do those buckets.
Yeah.
We just kind of make a list, right? What are the top unique features of the product? And it's not mapped to the value to the buyer. It's kind of like separated, but that's a really nice exercise. So,
yeah. And it's really helpful also to do it as a group instead of us just doing it in isolation. Part of the reason for that, obviously, is that there's probably going to be parts of the product that we never got to discover in our own discovery process of, evaluating the product and looking at the product. So there will be stuff that we don't know about that actually does exist. And that the team will be like, oh, but wait, we also do this thing. We're like, oh, excellent. Do we write that down? There's also very interestingly, if the product team is on the call, which generally in our case they are, we always try to involve the product team, is we find out about like, oh, we're actually building this thing right now, or, oh, that's actually on the roadmap already. And this is a really helpful way for framing how to think about this. You might also talk about, we sometimes talk about it as like feature families or the product pillars or something like that. Messaging pillars, product pillars. They should all kind of be the same. And at the end of the day, positioning them and grouping them through the lens of value they provide to customers. It's just the thing that makes the most sense. Like everybody can get on board with that, right?
I love this. So what's the first place when you write out messaging, do you just like start? Because what I do is I just start working on website messaging. Like that's the first place that I go to, especially the homepage, right? Because you're going to now use your top benefits, features, right? More so like the problem you're solving, your differentiation piece. The messaging really then just gets created as a next step as part of the website. Do you do that too? Or do you have a separate document that you guys like write stuff out? I think where we end with just separate document versus like, let's just get working on deliverables is you need to know what problem you're solving, why you exist, who you're for, what are you going to call this thing? Like, how do you explain this product, right? Top benefits, but once you nail that, like it's time to get it out in to something that other people see. And I think of website first. What do you do first?
So it depends on who the audience is, but generally we produce a messaging guide. And that messaging guide is at the highest level. So sometimes we break down our value themes by emotional benefits and functional benefits. And that is a helpful exercise sometimes. But again, I would say that it depends on the customer job, because if you're in a situation where you've got a PLG motion and you're focused on the job to be done of that PLG motion, then yes, you'd be writing a messaging guide. And potentially the next asset that you'd want to develop is a messaging strategy for the homepage, as an example. But if you are actually focused on an economic buyer, then the asset you would produce after the messaging guide wouldn't be a homepage. It would be maybe a sales deck, or it would be some other type of collateral that would be more appropriate, like, at a different point in the customer experience. But so that depends. The other thing too is that oftentimes when we're working with teams, particularly PLG teams, which is the vast majority that we work with, we don't go right to the homepage, although we often do. We are focused just as much on product onboarding because generally we're learning that product onboarding is actually the thing that is dropping the ball the most. And so we tend to go there pretty quickly after a messaging guide. So the messaging guide is meant to be, for us anyway, it's higher level. Sometimes, like I said, we break it down between emotional benefits and functional benefits because those serve different purposes in different contexts. And then The other thing that I would say is that like after we've developed that and get an alignment on that, then we would craft a homepage if that's the most appropriate thing for their goals or the opportunity they have available to them. But very often it's also onboarding, email, in-app sort of onboarding flow, or a product page or a features page or a pricing page. Like we can go in any one of those directions. It really depends on like the biggest opportunity.
Totally. What do you put in your messaging guide? I get that it's
Mm.
higher level, but I really just want to know like
The anatomy of it.
how do you make something that's helpful and guiding people? Because I don't do this. I go straight to the deliverable, like I said. And I kind of like have the team use the website as like, okay, this is where you'll find all of the pieces. Like I put very heavy emphasis on website because even if you're selling to, if you have a sales motion or if you have product led, like you need a
The
website.
highest level sort of.
Yeah, it's
asset.
just
Yeah.
it like everybody kind of checks the website, I guess. Maybe one day
Yeah.
they won't, but today people check the website. So that
sure.
is really like the hub for messaging. What does your messaging guide have?
I'm actually going to look it up right now.
Oh, you're like, I
Um,
forgot.
What's that?
You're like, I forgot. Let me look for it.
Oh, well, because I mean, okay, so if I go off the top of my head, like memory, because there's some sections and we evolve this over time too sometimes. And it depends on the team that we're working with again. So, okay, high level, definitely like high level value propositions. We tend to offer a few different directions. They're always being tested. This is like, something that we're always advocating for testing. We never propose like this is it, this is your value prop and that's it, that's all. There's always going to be variations that we provide.
This is really important, actually. I'm going to back this
Mhm.
up. Like
Mhm.
once you have your positioning messaging kind of laid out, it's then the team's job to go out there and get it out into the market and make sure that it's resonating.
Mhm.
It is such an important part of this process. It's not
Yep.
like a set it and forget it. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm going to look one up right now so I can see the table of contents and remind myself because they can get quite lengthy to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I want to back up for 1 second. The messaging guides that we produce, the main goal of the messaging guide is to create alignment, but also to help the team have a sort of center of gravity or like a source of truth for what type of messaging they should be using and like the words they should be using and the themes that they should be leaning into and sort of aligning on. Actually, fun fact, a recent episode recorded with April on positioning versus messaging. We talked a lot about the messaging guide as being this like critical team alignment tool. So there is the messaging guides that we produce. There's also like a bit of like educational content at the top of it. Like, what is a messaging guide and how should you use this thing and what's even in here? And also, they are per job to be done because the messaging they use for one job is going to be very different than another. That's another reason why a messaging guide and a homepage you would maybe pull apart because on a homepage, you're often crafting for more than one job to be done. And in a messaging guide, you wouldn't.
That's really interesting. You're right. There's
Yeah.
different use cases. And on the homepage, you're trying to kind of like speak to everything because you don't know which direction people will go in.
And they might be a functional user or an economic buyer. And so you have to sort of split the difference or like, find the right balance on a homepage versus in a messaging guide. You can actually lean right into one job to be done with everything, which can be amazing and very helpful for key pages on your website, but also obviously onboarding experiences, customer marketing and customer education, like all kinds of other stuff. So, okay, so anatomy of the messaging guide. So there's that educational piece at the top, the reminder of the job to be done. This is a really core and important part of this, just set the stage of like, who is this messaging guide for? Then value proposition, which I mentioned a couple of options there. Messaging, okay, this one actually has messaging for the problem. And I went into one that was actually like pretty unique. Okay, so I'll just keep going with this one. So messaging the problem. So struggles and recommended messaging around the struggle, competitive alternatives and their key shortcomings. So some copy and some messaging there for the team to lean on in context where that is important. Anxieties, key attributes, and recommended messaging to address those anxieties and tying those to the key attributes. Messaging the solution. So similarly, value themes, key attributes, and recommended messaging. And that's where we go into those value themes. And then messaging the outcomes, so desired outcomes and recommend messaging around that. That's where this one ends. But we actually have, like I said, this is kind of a unique one. I can't believe I grabbed like one of the most different ones. That's my example for you.
No, that's awesome. I love this. I think the very first thing you said, like, get everyone on the same page that this is what is a messaging
It's an alignment
guide.
tool at the end of the day. Yeah.
I think that it needs to be clear, like this can be used by everybody to align on the words and phrases and how to talk about things.
That's right.
And then you mentioned per jobs to be done. I love that, like per use case, because there are different use cases that come up and you want to lean into that and like be a little bit more
advantage of the nuance. There's a lot of nuance that comes up, right? When you do that type of psychographic research and you don't want to lose that. That's the whole reason for doing it is like, hey, our stuff's falling flat. Well, it's falling flat because you're not cutting to the heart of this.
Yeah.
And so these messaging guides focus on the job to be done. That's the goal of this thing is to like cut to the heart so that your messaging isn't generic and landing flat and, you know.
Totally.
Yeah.
The value props, you talked about emotional versus functional, problem, right? Struggles. Love this. Competitive alternatives, anxieties, and how to address it. This is great. I think that this messaging guide, this is exactly what I've been trying to figure out. Like, how do I explain how I do it? I just do it. I just take the research and then I turn that into words and phrases we need for the deliverable, which ends up being usually website stuff. But this is a way for us to have a guide. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have learned to take a very sort of systematic approach to this. I mean, we offer a productized service. So our whole thing is like, we do the same thing with every team that we work with, but the output is completely different. We also, I mean, it used to take us 6 months to do a project like this. And then it took us 12 weeks. And then we got it down to 8 weeks. And now we have it down to 6. And so we have this very sort of tight process and turnaround time on this type of thing. So we have templatized, but not to a fault. Do you know what I mean? Like we always have that sort of backbone there. And so that's a starting ground for this. The other thing that we often include in our messaging guides is a glossary of terms and also testimonials. Because very often when we're having conversations with customers, they'll say stuff that we're like, ooh, this is gold. We got to get this on the website in these key, parts of the, maybe product pages related to certain features or whatever. And so a lot of testimonial opportunities also come up in those conversations. So we like to squirrel those away at the bottom of the messaging guide as a nice little surprise for the teams when they're like, oh, perfect. And so that's the other thing that we would include in this.
I love that too. Yeah, those little nuggets are so valuable and can be used right away, like in everything, right? And your website and your sales deck and your conversations and your sales emails.
That's right.
So very usable. Love it. How often should customer research be conducted? What do you think?
What's your answer?
Why are you laughing?
Because I know you have an answer to this. I mean, I always say, obviously it depends, but I would always recommend it when there's a major shift in the market or when there's a major shift in the value that you provide or the product has changed to the point where your value proposition is probably different. A year ago, 2 years ago, it was that the market shifted. And now I am finding it that its products are shifting. So, and both, I would say, really warrant it. As a general rule, I mean, if you're an AI product, it's probably like quarterly.
I was going to say weekly. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it's hard.
Quarterly. I would agree with that. I would agree with quarterly. Also, when you're early stage, you have your first set of customers. You have your first 10. And they look different from your next 10 or 20, right? So I would do it then again. However long that takes, it needs to happen again for those people that come in cold.
Yes, good point. Yeah, your first 10 customers probably did not come in cold.
Right.
Versus, the next 100 that came in, the circumstances were entirely different that they came into contact with your offer. And so really getting that context, that's the one that I find the most fun is that next one, right? It was like, what happened? Where did you come from? You beautiful thing, you.
Yeah,
right?
you beautiful thing, you. I love you. Where did you come from? Why are you here?
Yeah.
You crazy,
I think that's when
crazy
things
person.
Yeah, that's when things get really, really interesting. And also where the team gets really excited because you're learning like this is a net new group of or set of insights that the team can then lean into and start to actually think about like, oh, now we can build something scalable around this, which is when things get, I mean, in my opinion, pretty fun.
Yeah. Okay. I seriously, I've learned a lot from you that actually I can implement. I know the listener that's been listening to this episode has learned a lot from you, that it's not just a theoretical conversation. Like, thank you for digging into some of this work that you do and the exact stuff that you like actually do and examples. And so I super appreciate you, and I'm not mad at you for bashing voice of customer. I get it.
I redeemed myself now.
You redeemed yourself. And Gia, we're still friends. So thank you so much for joining me. If anybody wants to find Gia, she is on LinkedIn, Georgiana Laudi. I will include the link in the show notes. And Forget the Funnel, if you want to check that out, go to forgetthefunnel.com. And it was wonderful spending time with you, Gia. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Anna.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Building with Buyers. New episodes drop weekly, so make sure you're following wherever you get your podcasts. You can find me on LinkedIn, Anna Furmanov. Visit my website to learn more about how to turn customer insights into positioning and messaging your buyers will understand, furmanovmarketing.com. And don't forget to leave a review if you're loving the show.